Okay, story time. I wanted to share with you the time when I sold the MCG for $24.95. Now, the MCG is the Melbourne Cricket Ground, and for those of you who don't know, it's one of Australia's most iconic sports stadiums. And here in Australia, we are sports mad. So as you can imagine, when I sold it for $24.95, I got quite a lot of buzz, and the media picked it up and they absolutely loved the story. Now, I wanted to share the story with you so you can understand my thought process that I went through, and there were a few key lessons that I picked up along the way that have really shaped who it is that I am today. And I'd also like to give you a little bit of inspiration as well, just reassure you that you might be on the verge of one idea might be the next idea that really catapults you to success, and provide a little bit of that inspiration. So if I take you back to the start, it all began for me. I just finished school. It was early in the 2000s. We just had the boom and bust of the .com biz, and I was getting interested in wealth creation and personal development. And particularly, I was really focusing in on what it was that I was doing with the stock market, but I also started to expand my horizons, looking in the personal development arena and wealth creation as well, and started to think a little bit about business and real estate as well as trading. So I started trying to consume everything that I could. I was listening to tapes, reading books, attending different workshops, and one of the workshops that I went through early on was one by a gentleman called Brad Sugars, and he owns Action International, which is a business coaching business, but he really got his business start by buying and selling businesses, and it was something that was interesting to me because he touched on a few of those other areas as well, the real estate and also trading. So I went along to one of his evening workshops, and that was just a pre-sell, I suppose, for a complete 1 week long course that he was running up on the Gold Coast called the Billionaire Boot Camp, I think it was. And he sold me at his evening workshop to go to that week-long workshop. So I'd booked in for that, and in the lead up to that workshop, he sent out a copy of a book called The 1 Minute Millionaire, and that's this one here. And you can see this is my copy that I got sent out, and you can see there are quite a few different highlights, and I've marked out the points of interest for me. But one of the real things that stood out when I read that book was a story about a gentleman called Paul Hartunian, and this guy sold the Brooklyn Bridge for $19.95. Now, the way the story goes is Paul was watching TV, and they were interviewing the people who did the demolition or restoration on the Brooklyn Bridge, and in the background from where they were doing the interview, he could see a big pile of rubble, you know, bits of concrete and wood and things like that. And then on the other side, he saw the truck of the actual demolition people with the phone number plastered across it. So he came up with this great idea. He thought, I'll give them a call and find out what it is that they're doing with all of the discarded bits from the demolition, and see what he could do with that. So he contacted them, and they said, look, we're just going to drop it off at the tip. And he said, how about I give you $500 if you deliver it to me? Now, they were pretty stoked because they were just going to be throwing it away. So they said no worries, and delivered it to him, and he started to take action really quickly. And as they were delivering the wood over, he said he started to think about what he could do, and he'd already sort of started to formalize this idea. He was going to write a press release that New Jersey man sells Brooklyn Bridge for $19.95. And he was writing up the press release as that was getting delivered over, and once it arrived, he said, yeah, this is exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to create little certificates giving genuine pieces from the Brooklyn Bridge. And the Brooklyn Bridge is really well known over in the States. And needless to say, after he got the press release ready and sent it out, as back in the days pre the internet, so when you send a press release out on the internet now, it just gets picked up straight away. But back then, he had to wait a couple of days before the media picked it up, because he was sending it out by mail and faxing it out. But when they picked it up, they absolutely loved the story. They just couldn't get enough of it. And they ended up hounding him over the course of the next 6 to 12 months, wanting to do follow-up interviews and stories. And they ran his story on CNN. They ran it almost like back to back for a couple of days on one of the CNN channels. And it was a huge success for him. He ended up making over $1 million from selling these pieces of the Brooklyn Bridge. Now, that story was still fresh in my mind after reading The 1 Minute Millionaire, and I was driving past the MCG and noticed that they were doing some renovations on the Ponstead stand, which is one of the stands of the MCG. It's a really well-known one because they had the bits of the green wooden seating, and in the members area they had this beautiful carpet with the MCC crest on it, and they were doing this renovation. I thought, oh, genius, I'm going to replicate what it is that he was doing and do that here for the MCG. Now, I suppose that's the real first key lesson, this idea of making sure that you model yourself on success, and that's exactly what I did. So first of all, I contacted the MCG to find out who was doing the demolition, and then contacted them, went out to them, I think it was in like Airport West or something like that, and I went through a lot of what they had pulled away, and my first idea, maybe not being the sharpest tack in the box, I thought I'll sell bricks from the MCG. So I was actually planning on mailing out bricks, and as you can imagine, that's going to absolutely kill me on postage. But while I was out there, I picked up a few bricks and chatted with the guy who was there and sort of gave him an idea as to what I was wanting to do. I wanted to get pieces of the MCG as memorabilia, and he said, oh, you might want to get in contact with the other wreckers, which was Wheel and the Wreckers, because he said they had pieces of the actual wooden seating and the crested carpet. So I thought, oh, perfect, that's exactly what I need to do. Got in touch with them, went out to their wrecking office, and I think it was just outside of Melbourne, and I went in my own car, and when I got there I was just blown away with how much cool stuff they had taken from that demolition. And I said, oh look, I want to buy some of this stuff, and they said, yeah, no worries, it should be here. And I said, okay, well I'll come back later today and I'll buy a whole lot of it. And I went over to my dad's and got his van. He had this van, and we loaded it up full of bits of wood and carpet from Wheel and the Wreckers. And I really at first just focused in on the wood, thinking I'd do just like Paul Hartunian. I'd cut it into little pieces and then send it as a certificate. And then there was also the carpet. I got some of the carpet, but I said to him, look, I can't fit any more in my car. Can I come back and pick it up tomorrow? And he said, yeah, that's no worries. It should still be here. And I thought, oh, fantastic. Drove home, and that night, as you can imagine, I was doing all of my numbers and imagining how much money I was going to make, and I was going to end up retiring on some tropical paradise on some beach up in Malaysia somewhere, who knows. I was just thinking of all of these ideas and counting my money before I'd made even a cent. And I started to come up with some ideas of how I was going to replicate what Paul had done. So I ended up going back the next day to Wheel and the Wreckers, and when I got there, the guy said, oh look, you'll never believe it, someone came in and bought the remainder of the carpet and some of the wood as well. But he said, don't worry, they said they were just going to use it for lining the floor of their pool room. Now at the time I was thinking, oh, I hope that's all they're going to be doing with it. Hopefully no one had come up with my idea, or they were going to use it for another purpose. I didn't really think that someone else would have come up with my idea, because it was such a unique idea, I thought. And so I said, oh look, I'll take a little bit more of the wood, and then took that home. And then I started to get everything ready. I wrote up the press release, set up the website, got all of my ducks lined up ready so I could just shoot them all down in one go. And I was just about to launch it, and I knew I was coming up to this billionaire boot camp up on the Gold Coast with Brad Sugars. So I thought, well, what I'll do is, rather than kickstarting this, knowing how much media attention Paul Hartunian got, I should wait until I get back. So that way I could be here and I can get my face on all of the different magazines and in the newspaper and on TV and all that type of thing. So it's best I'm here in Melbourne. So I thought I'd leave it. I set everything up, ready to go, and then I went up to this billionaire in training boot camp. And while I was up there, just before the event, just as it was happening, I got a phone call from some friends, and they said, hey Dave, did you give the wood or carpet or anything to anyone else, or have you told anyone else about this idea? And I said, no, I'm planning on launching it when I get back. And they said, well, you'll never believe it, someone else has had the same idea as you. He's a 21-year-old guy here in Melbourne selling the MCG, just like Paul Hartunian did, just like my idea. And I remember hearing that, and at the time I was, as you could imagine, I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Someone had taken my opportunity. This was my once in a lifetime opportunity, and it had been snatched out from underneath me. And I really felt physically ill at the time, and I wasn't too sure what I could do. I couldn't believe that I was up here. What was I doing doing this course when I should be down there making a real go of it? And after a few days, and it began to settle, and I really started to get into the workshop. Very early on in the workshop, one of the first things that they asked was, had anybody implemented some of the strategies that they'd learned from the book, the 1 Minute Millionaire? So had anyone taken what they'd learned? Because they were trying to encourage people actually taking action and that speed of implementation. So I got up and told my MCG story and what I had planned for when I got back. And someone had said, they kind of yelled out, "Oh, that's you." And I didn't really think much of it, but thinking back now, they were actually referring to this other guy, because it was just all happening at the same time. As I was telling this story, within a day or two, he'd gone out and done that down in Melbourne, and they must have thought that it was me. And I ended up winning $1,000 for that idea of actually coming up with an idea and implementing it straight from what it was that we learnt in the book. And that Brad Sugar's seminar was fantastic, and it sort of built me up and made me feel 6 feet tall and bulletproof. And even though someone had taken that idea and run with it while I wasn't here, I was keen to hit the ground running when I got back to Melbourne. So I got back to Melbourne and did a little bit of research, and yep, the guy had got picked up by, I think it was a current affair, and had been published in a couple of different newspapers. And for me, I was like, oh, you know, what can I do? Maybe I can still ride on the coattails. It just so happened that this guy was the same age as I was. He was a young entrepreneur. He was very similar. Like, I mean, the makeup was really, really similar to who I am. And so I thought, look, maybe I can still do something with this. And I went ahead with my press release, and I was quite fortunate that it still got picked up. It got picked up by the Herald Sun, and I got on the Today Show, got in MX Magazine, got on Nova Radio. I got lots of media coverage, and what I ended up doing is I created these little certificates. So just like Paul Hartunian did, I was selling pieces of the MCG, and you can see a little bit here stuck on some paper here that I got from Officeworks, and wrote up a little history about the MCG. And the carpet, which I ended up getting here, I still got some of the carpet, so I took that and framed it and sold quite a lot of those. So I think the little pieces went for $24.95, and then the carpet I put in a big frame, and that went for like $800 or $900. And then I had a few other little limited edition type things like this, where I just sold pieces of the wood. That's the green wood there, and you can see the MCG just above it. Needless to say, the real key takeaway there is even in your darkest hour, you can always make lemonade out of lemons. And I took that situation, which at the time, you know, I felt so bad about, but when I got here, I sort of ran with it, and it did really quite well. Even though that he'd run with it, I still got some great media coverage and ended up selling quite a lot. And that was the start of my entrepreneurial journey. And you can still head over to owntheg.com and see I'm still selling pieces of the MCG. You can find out a little bit more about the story. I've got the clip of me on the Today Show and some of the different scanned-in news articles from the different papers and magazines that I was in. For me, it really was one of those stepping stones, and I learned some really valuable things from that whole experience. And I think probably one of the most important is this idea that if you've got a great idea, there's a great chance that someone else out there is having the same idea as you at the same time. They might not even be in the same country. It's almost like there's this universal consciousness that we're all tapping into, and sometimes when the time is right and the ideas are ripe, they start to bubble up, and lots of people are getting these ideas. So if you get a great idea, you need to start implementing it now, and you should start working on that right now, because if you don't, someone else will, and they'll take that idea, their idea as well, and start to implement it. So that was a real key takeaway from me. Now, fortunately, this story did have a happy ending. I still got some good coverage, and quite a few years down the track, I kept on crossing paths with the other person who sold the MCG. It just seemed that we were very similar. I think just in the way that we are, in the same background that we've had, and how we've developed into the people that we are today. So me and him, we ended up catching up, and for those of you who know, the other guy who sold the MCG is Pete Williams, and he and I, we're good friends now, and even our girlfriends, when they first met and they caught up, they're like, wow, I can't believe that there is another person out there like you. My girlfriend used to think that I was the only person out there like me, but she said, oh, you know, you guys are really, really similar. So I suppose that's the silver lining on that cloud, and we've become great friends and started working on a whole lot of different projects together. And I suppose that just about wraps it up. If you want to find out more stories like these and how I got my entrepreneurial start, you can head over to davidjenyns.com.